Um, and I'll explain in a little bit why. Well, I'm recording it for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which is I asked for some information online from other beekeepers on the topic, because it's been 20 years since I was a new beekeeper. And I had a lot of ideas of things that could be challenging for new beekeepers, but I thought I would also put a query out to some groups that include new beekeepers and old beekeepers. Got some very good ideas, but at the end of that, somebody said, well, I hope you'll let us know how it turns out. And I said, well, I'll try to record it. And if it works out, I'll post it on YouTube, and they can see their contributions put to work, and we'll take it from there. And my business is Booger Hill Bee Company. It's okay to laugh, and it's memorable. And there's a few miles, in the county I live in, there is a community called Booger Hill, and there's a Booger Hill Road. And for those of you who are, native Southerners and that are, old like me, you'll recognize Booger as a haunt or a spirit. Doesn't have anything to do with mucus. And Booger Hill was a haunted hill. So it goes back to the turn of the 1900s, and the folks in the community were convinced that the hill was haunted. So that's where it got its name. And so I probably could have called it Haunted Hill. I've done I've sold in Atlanta, and of course everybody looks at it and goes, ah, and then I have, people that come up to me at the farmer's market and say, oh God, my children just love this name. So it goes both ways. It goes both ways. I keep about 100 hives in and around the Athens area, sell honey at the Athens farmer's market. And I've had as many as 220 hives at one time or another. And it just, it was just insane. I couldn't keep up with it. I'm not sure I can keep up with 100. I'm trying to find a level where I can manage this. And of course, I keep saying I'm cutting back, but I'll get 50 queens coming next month. So I say one thing and I do something else. So you can't depend on me in that regard. But I also have one bee yard up in the mountains of North Carolina that I keep bees in year round. And it's just this fabulous place. It's remote, very isolated. I drive 8 miles down an old U.S. Forest Service road, and if you meet a car on it, everybody has to work their way around to get past each other. And I go about 8 miles down that, and then I have to drive across the Nantahala River, and there's no bridge. So on a day like today, I'm not going anywhere near it. And then the property the bees are on belongs to a friend of mine, and it's all surrounded by the Nantahala National Forest, so it's a really pristine location. And I put a jar of the sourwood honey on the raffle table, so if you've never had sourwood honey, or if you've had it and you want some more, and you're feeling lucky, be sure to buy some raffle tickets. I also am going to use this as a prop here in a little bit. It's a brand new day dance smoker with a guard, so if you don't have your equipment yet, or even if you do, we'll put it on the raffle table too when I'm finished, so that give somebody a chance to do that too. So again, if you're feeling lucky and you want to take a shot at those things, be sure to stock up on raffle tickets. I want to find out, this topic's a little different from my normal fare. I'm a nuts and bolts kind of person. So when I do talks, it's usually about things like swarm management, mite management, splitting hives, catching swarms, that sort of thing. And that's the way my mind works, is it's a process. And it's easy to say, well, when I'm trying to catch swarms, I do this first, this second, this third, and I go through it. And so to organize a talk, it's just it's pretty straightforward. So when I got this topic, my first thought was, well, I don't know if I can do this. But then my second thought was, how often when I'm at the farmer's market, former students come by and we chat, and I finally get around to asking them, well, how are your bees? And they say, well, I don't have them anymore. And I know then that something happened. They had some expectation, and the reality was not as pleasant. Something happened. It had to be pretty significant, because they went through a class, they bought equipment, they bought bees, they started beekeeping, and they quit. And so, as I contemplated that, I thought about how a topic like this really is important. And then I went to, how many of you are either you don't have your bees? I know there's a couple folks here who don't have their bees yet. How many of you are like first or second year beekeepers? Okay. When I queried, I put a query out on a beekeeper's message board, and there are a lot of new beekeepers there, but there are also a lot of experienced beekeepers on that message board as well. And I said, I'm doing this talk in a few weeks. Here's the subject. I've got some ideas of my own, but I'm open to ideas. I would tell you that of the replies, there were a number of them that either stated or implied that I needed to tell you that the thing you need to expect is that you're going to lose all your bees. That's what they said to tell you. I'm not going to tell you that. That's what they said to tell you. I'm going to tell you that if you're here, you're doing exactly what you should do to change that potential reality. This is a good group. I've been to a lot of beekeepers groups, and this is an exceptional group. You've got a lot of passionate people here, a lot of experienced people here, a lot of people here who are interested in seeing you succeed and are willing to invest time and energy to help you do that. And so if you come to these meetings, you get acquainted with the people that are here, you find out, what their mentoring system is, whether it's individuals, whether they have, I'm sure, some kind of mentoring process here. Somebody you can ask questions, but also when they invite people to come and speak, they try to bring in people that have a timely topic, something that's important at the time they do the meeting that will help contribute to your success. So for those of you that are relatively new, you're in the right place. And the advice that I got to tell you you're going to lose all your bees just isn't so. When I think about last month, you guys had a workshop, a one-day workshop. Somebody said there were 90 people there. How many of you were at that? Okay. So what do we got here? About 30 people, 40 people or so? So there's about 50 people that were there that aren't here. Those would be the people that I would tell, you're going to lose all your bees. Those are the ones. So that's just a kind of an introduction, but that was one of the things that I was told by that group. The reason I'm recording is that the people that gave me advice then felt like they had an investment in this talk. And so they wanted to see it, but the one guy that I stole a couple ideas from, actually I stole ideas from a few of them. One of the fellows I stole some ideas from, he's a Canadian beekeeper, and he's up in British Columbia. He's an experienced beekeeper. So, obviously he's not going to come down for this talk, but so he probably knows more than I do. I would say almost certainly he knows more than I do. So with that, I'll move into the talk, but that's kind of what I wanted to tell you is you've set in the stage. If you're a new beekeeper here, you're setting the stage to succeed. And if you're an established member of this group, understand how important that you are to these new beekeepers. Because, when I talk about the people that come around after my class and say they've stopped beekeeping, sadly, I don't provide a mentorship. I do a class. And one of the reasons I do the class is I don't have time in the season to really become a one-on-one mentor. So I teach the class, and that, salves my guilt at not being a mentor. But you've got a good group here, and for the people here who provide that support, it is important. That's why you do have a good group here, and a nice sized group, and a group with a lot of experience and a lot of passion. And I admire the people who organize this. Okay, first 2 years. One of the ideas I got online, the fella said there's a guy named Randy Oliver. He's a beekeeping, he does a lot of research, but it's individual research. He's not associated with the university. And by the way, I'm going to have to try to keep track of time. I was going to start a timer. I'm juggling 3 or 4 things here, none of which I'll do very well. But this camera will only record 30 minutes at a time, so I have to restart it before 30 minutes or else it'll quit and I'll lose half the thing and all these people will be upset with me online. But one of the one of the beekeepers that responded, he said that Randy Oliver, who this chart belongs to, had done a talk, and he described, the person online described these different aspects of beekeeping maturity. And as luck would have it, I was just going to list them because I thought they were kind of, good. But like the day before yesterday, on my Facebook page, there the chart was. So it was almost like it was cosmic, that I was gonna have this chart. And it's got some merit. It's got some merit. And basically what he says is, this is a graph of beekeepers' maturity from beginning until, and you see I just bought bees on the beginning, and at the top of the third year, you think, I've got this. And then there's the pit of disillusionment. The pit of disillusionment are those ones that lost all their bees, or they lose some of their bees, or a variety of things happen. But there really is, this is probably more common than you might think. It's good for a chuckle, but I think it's more than that. I think there's some merit to it. And then once you come out of that pit of disillusionment, that's when you get on that plateau where every year goes by, the thing you realize the most is how little you actually do know. And that's where I am today. The one thing I know for sure is I don't know very much. And I know that I learn a lot every year, and it never ends, and that's good. That's good. So Randy Oliver, I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. This will probably be the last time I tell you that I got something from the guys online, but this came from a guy. This came from the fella in Canada. He posts under the name of Grazi2. I told him I was going to make sure that I credited him with this. He gave me the idea for the first two slides, this one and the next one, and it just sounded pretty good. He's done workshops like this or talks like this before up in British Columbia, so he's had time to think about it, and again, he is an experienced beekeeper. But that is kind of the expectation most of us have when we start keeping bees. Can have honey. Makes sense. The reality is, if you see now, if I really was doing this picture right, these are my pictures, so I would show that swarm up in a tree out of reach. So it's not recoverable. So not only did you lose half of your foragers from the hive, but you also lost them, period. They're gone. And that's probably a little closer to reality. I'm confident there's going to be swarm management speakers here in the next month or so, which is what you'll want to hear about, so you can head this off in your hives. Just a quick, for those of you who aren't familiar with what this means. After bees leave the hive in the spring, it's a reproductive event. Your nectar flow is here. That's where the bulk of the nectar goes every year. This line number 1 is the population of bees in the hive, and as you see, it peaks right in the middle of the nectar flow. Our bees are building up right now in anticipation of spring. Even before there's any nectar, they respond to a lot of cues and begin to expand. But when they swarm, what happens is the population grows, boom, half of them leave. And then by the time they recover in the middle of the flow, you see the difference in the population. So these bees will probably just make enough honey to get themselves through the year, and they kind of negate your expectations. Okay, so I'm going to give you some advice. Harden your heart. I can't tell you how many times I've had people call me, and if they weren't in tears, they were close to being in tears because they did lose a hive of bees. I would submit to you that if you ask any beekeeper in the room who has had bees for more than even a few years, they've lost hives. This is a photograph from inside one of my hives from about 2 years ago. So I've been keeping bees 18 years, and I still lost a hive of bees. Actually, I lose a hive or 2 or 3 or some every year. So you have to allow yourself that you're going to lose some. You're not going to lose all of them, but you're going to lose some. And each time you lose them, you try to understand why they failed, and try to figure out what to do the next time so it won't happen again. But allow it. Don't let it break your heart. It will. I mean, it will break your heart. You know, even today when I do that, it's, you know, March, the nectar's just about to flow and my bees starved. Tens of thousands of dead bees on the bottom because I didn't keep up with them. So it's my fault. So it still breaks my heart, but it doesn't break my heart to a point that I say, I can't do this anymore. So you have to harden your heart a little bit. I trust that somebody's talked with most of you about varroa mites. If they haven't, those guys, when you hear about decline of honeybees, that's the underlying problem right there. They're a parasite that is, it is wicked in so many different ways. It's manageable. You know, everybody else probably silenced their phones. I thought I had silenced mine. And they look pretty big in this image. They're little tick-like things that suck bee fat, and they spread and vector all kinds of plagues. And they parasitize developing brood. They just are an awful thing, an awful, tremendous pressure on a hive. And the problem is with so many new beekeepers, at least, and we're kind of going back to the new beekeeper thing, they're easy to overlook. Your hive's booming along, everything looks great. I did a class a few years ago, and in March, we split 2 hives in the bee yard. Same day, we did the same technique, put them side by side. And then in August, we come back and we do a workshop on how to prepare for winter. And the week before that August class, I put a sticky sheet, a real adhesive sheet on the bottom of one of the hives, and I put a mite treatment in it. And the next week, then when the class met, I pulled that sheet out, and there were 1,000 dead mites on it. And I told the students, I said, now, this is a 4-week treatment. We got 1,000 mites first week. There's probably another 2,000 in there. I said, now let's go over to the other next door neighbor, started at the same day, the same time, and untreated, and I challenge you to find a single mite in there. They're visible. And we took that hive, there were like 15 students, we took that hive completely apart, went all the way down to the bottom board. Every frame we took out and we inspected and passed those frames around, and one eagle-eyed student saw 1 varroa mite. Knowing full well there were at least 3,000 in there. And that's why these things are so devastating oftentimes to new beekeepers, is that you open the hive, you don't see them. But trust me, they're in there. And so come up with a strategy to manage them. And I won't try to tell you what strategy to use. There's, you know, philosophical differences. I will always encourage you to find a mentor who manages bees in a way that you find that you're comfortable with. Try to find a mentor. Try to find somebody who, you know, you're philosophically in tune with. And the limiting factor I usually put on it is, if you can, try to find somebody that's been doing it that way for at least 5 years without having to go out and buy bees to replace their losses. So if you have a philosophy on how you want to manage mites, what you want to do, how you want to treat them, and you find somebody that's been doing that for 5 years successfully, do what they tell you to do. If you can't find someone who's doing it successfully, you may have to look at your philosophy. But if you don't do something about them, then you're in for trouble. If you don't manage them in some way, you're in for trouble. The internet. I took a couple pictures. One of them I was, you know. The internet, you know, has a tremendous amount of good information and is packed full of awful information. And distinguishing between them is a challenge. And so I would caution you, when you do go to the internet, to First, I would advise you in every chance, every opportunity you have, use a real mentor. Use a real live face person, a group like this, real people. You can see their hives, you can talk with them, you can get a sense of them rather than going to the internet for advice. There are a couple of, I listed on the, there's a handout around, hopefully everybody got a copy. Randy Oliver, who did the chart on that first of the beekeeper's maturity, he has a website called scientificbeekeeping.com. He's trustworthy. And I listed a couple of his articles that were focused on new beekeepers that you might go to and read if you have the time. His are pretty good. There's also, I listed a YouTube site that's run by, I don't even know if I can pronounce this, it's the University of Guelph. It's a Canadian university. They've got some excellent YouTube videos that are directed toward new beekeepers. And I think if you stay with university-sponsored websites or boards or YouTube channels, you'll do all right. Extension Service, you know, federal agencies, USDA, those people that have put out information, you can do pretty well with those. But be careful of the others, because there's a pile of people out there that sow massive amounts of misinformation and bad information, and heaven knows why. I think some of them really even believe the stuff that they're putting out there. But be careful. Just be careful on the internet. And that's after I bragged about going to the internet to get ideas. But I you know, but they were just ideas, you know. So this is even in real life, if you ask multiple beekeepers the same question, you're very likely to get very different answers. And you know what's even worse is sometimes they're contradictory answers. And I'll use the message board again as an idea. There was just a thing on recently that somebody had inherited some sorghum syrup, and they said, you know, can I feed this to my bees? Well, half of the respondents said, oh, no, don't do that. The other half of the respondents said, yeah, it's fine. And then somebody went and dug up an old 1800 era beekeeping journal where the same question had been asked. And they posted the replies to those, and they were the same thing. Yes, no, maybe. You know, and it's a, you know, I mean, I would tell you then, if you get those kind of answers, take what's obviously, whatever that might be, the safest answer. Somebody asked a year or so ago, should I be feeding my bees 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 sugar syrup this time of year? You know, 2 parts sugar to 1 part water, or 1-to-1. It's a binary question. You know, it's this or that. Well, there were about 40 or 50 replies later. Half said 1-to-1, half said, well, part said 1-to-1, part said 2-to-1, said no, and some said no, I'd do 3-to-5. And somebody else says, no, I just put sugar on a newspaper and put that in, and somebody else said, no, make sugar bricks. And the poor guy just wanted to know if he was supposed to use 1-to-1 or 2-to-1. You know, so ask multiple beekeepers the same question, you're going to get multiple answers. Beekeeping's local. You know, it's not going to matter. It's not going to matter where you're getting your information. I think the difference between Sparta and Unadilla, for example, is pretty significant. I think the difference between Sparta and Athens is pretty significant. And then if you get online, heaven help you, you know, you get some Canadian beekeeper answering a question about overwintering, you're going to get, you know, heaven only knows what kind of information you're going to get, but it's going to be very different. So keep that in mind, that your locality makes a world of difference. And you know, if you're here near Sparta and you're trusting Sparta beekeepers for your information, you're probably going to get suitable information. But if you go online, or if you talk with somebody that's from somewhere very different, you know, things like, I've seen, you know, Florida beekeeper talking about overwintering online. You know, I keep talking about online after I tell everybody to be careful with it. There was a Florida beekeeper that was talking about, you know, getting his hives ready for winter, And somebody started advising him to insulate it and do all of these other things. And you know, you look and you see one's from Michigan and the other's from Florida, you know, and the guy in Florida doesn't need to insulate his hives, you know, he just doesn't need to do that. But that's the way, you know, it's that dramatically different in some instances. So just keep that in mind when you're out gathering information. I have about 1.5 miles from me, 5 years ago, in a field, I saw about 20 hives, brand new, all painted up, flashy, pretty. In that same spring, they were full of bees. And I'd see somebody out there once in a while, I don't even know who it was. It's just a couple miles from me. And you know, every once in a while when I pass by, I'd see somebody out there working those bees. And I go by now, and half of them have fallen over. There are no bees in any of them anymore. The grass has grown up. I don't know if that was because they tried to get too big too quick, because they started out with 20 from ground zero, or if they just, you know, didn't. They just thought they could do it without any kind of help. But at a beekeepers meeting a couple of years ago, a fella came in, never seen him before. I don't even remember what the original topic was. But he said, one of the first things he said was, he asked the group, he said, how many times can I split my hives this spring? And somebody said, well, you know, a lot of depending on that. And it's just, you know, and he wanted numbers. He wanted to know. And so somebody said, well, what are you trying to do? And he said, well, I want 100 hives. And they said, well, how many do you have? And he said, I've got 5. And then somebody said, when did you start them? And he said, last spring. And then somebody else said, what do you do about varroa mites? And he said, well, I didn't do anything. I didn't see any. And, you know, this guy was getting ready to race out and buy, you know, 50 nuke boxes and make splits to high heaven on a bunch of hives that were already on a collapse, because he was not patient enough to learn the basics before he decided to expand. And I've not seen him since, and I'm not surprised. Give yourself a few years. You know, it's pretty easy when you're looking at it you're talking to another beekeeper and you say, well, how much honey did you get from your hives this year? And they say, well, I got 5 gallons, average 5 gallons a hive. And you start thinking, 5 gallons a hive? You know, if I had 20 hives, that's 100 gallons. You know, I could stand 100 gallons of honey. Don't get ahead of yourself. Learn what you need to know to manage a few, and then expand. Don't try to do it all at once. It'll take the joy out of it, and your chances of being successful are just that much less. So take your time. Take your time. It's an urge. I see it all the time. I see online somebody said, I bought my first hive of 10,000. You know, okay. You know, so I mean, they're already thinking. You know, take your time. A lot of people forget that bees can starve in the summer. This is a chart of available nectar. The blue lines average on a monthly basis, and they're not really actual. You know, they're not very accurate. I mean, in January and December, they're even smaller. But you notice right here, that's where the greatest amount of nectar is available. You can draw a graph like this from just about anywhere, unless it's tropical. A tropical place probably has nectar year-round in about the same amounts. But in most temperate climates, you can do something like that. The yellow overlay is the bees' consumption, month to month. And so if you see, a lot of times, on a good year, on an average year, the bees are consumers. And if you watch the summer, they're pretty stinking close. And so a lot of new beekeepers will make the mistake of having this boatload of honey in June and saying, well, I'm just going to take some of this off, and they'll fill it they'll refill it. And they won't. So be careful. Be careful, in particular this summer, because it's deceptive. People sometimes will say to me, you know, well, what can I plant for my bees? And I say, well, if you're not planting if you're planting less than a few acres, it probably doesn't matter. Because, you know, well, I'll show you in a minute. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the other people that are out there pollinating and who needs what. Am I making sense? Okay. I mean, this, you know, in my mind, this is how, these are some of the things to think about to help make your reality closer to your expectations. How to avoid getting the wrong expectations or adjusting your reality so that it's closer to what you want it to be. Bees didn't read the same books you read. You know, it's important to read books, but understand that those creatures that are in those hives, they're living creatures, and they may abandon the basic rules of the road if there's a pressure or a need for them to do so. And a couple of things that I'll use as examples are, you know, if you read most books, they'll tell you that in the winter, your bees will quit making brood. Well, I can open up hives in December and January if I get a nice warm day. And in particular, December, you would think they would be broodless. And it's the exceptional hive that doesn't have brood in my yards. So I don't know if it's the race of bees I have, or if it's, you know, that those books were written by people that were up north. And that's more true and more accurate if you're in Michigan or Canada or up in New England. I don't know. But I know most of my bees make brood year round. And that's kind of an important thing to know. The other thing is you guys talked about bee space. Anybody talked about bee space before? Okay. Well, a bee space, you know, for those of you that might not know, is a space about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch. And the books will tell you that the bees will leave that open. And if the space is bigger than that, they'll fill it full of comb. And if it's smaller than that, they'll glue it up with propolis. But every spring, a properly designed hive, when you put a new box on top of a box, a second story, a super on or whatever, if they're well designed, the bottom of the frames in this box should be bee space above the top of the frames in the box below. And if that's true and the books are right, they should never build comb in there. And I would suggest to you that most of us open up hives in the spring and there's all kinds of comb and drone brood and all kinds of other things in there. So they don't always follow the rules. And so just, you know, if you see something that doesn't match the books, don't be too surprised. And it's not just sweet spring bees and grumpy bees in the fall, although I can tell you, probably this will be a little bit more suitable to being careful, but I will tell you, never is a big word. I haven't ever in my memory opened a hive that I didn't wear a veil. I always wear a veil. I get stung on the nose, I'm going to go sit down somewhere and cry. And if nobody's around, I'm going to say real bad things. And I may be done for the day. It just hurts. So I'm going to wear a veil no matter what else. In the spring of the year, I may wear a t-shirt. I may not have gloves, but I promise you, there's a long sleeve shirt and gloves in the car within walking distance. And I had a fellow one time kept telling me he had this one hive in his yard that was they were just meaner than snakes, always meaner than snakes. And you didn't know what to do about them. And I said, well, I'll come take a look. And I went over and we smoked them and popped the cover, and those bees were just as easy going as could be. And he said, I don't understand it. And I said, well, how do you do this? And he said, well, usually I start over on that end. And I said, okay, well, next time you come, start on this end. And I think you'll discover that the bees on the other end are going to be the grumpy ones. And it's, the pheromones start to fly, and, you're working these bees, and the next door neighbors start to get those pheromones, and they start to get cranked up, and you get this ripple effect. By the time you get to the end of the row, you get some grumpy bees. So it may be something that simple. But in the fall of the year, in spring, everybody's just happy. First off, 2/3 of the bees aren't inside the box. They're out working. So first off, the population's down. But the second thing is that they've got nectar coming in, and they just are not terribly defensive. but in the fall of the year they tend to be. Mine do. Mine tend to be in the fall. Definitely grumpier bees. So just go, and I'll probably step on some toes here. I'm going to try not to. Well, no, I'm not even going to try not to. You know, I talk about a veil. If whatever you do when you open your hives, you wear whatever protective equipment it takes for you to be comfortable. And don't let some old beekeeper try to shame you into going without gloves or going without a veil or any of that. You go in with what you're comfortable wearing. And if somebody says, oh, you don't need those gloves, you know, you just take them off your Christmas card list and you keep doing what you're doing. Because if you get intimidated or bullied into getting your hand stung and it hurts and you don't like it, the next thing you know, you're not opening your hive. And if you don't open your hive, you're never going to learn how to keep those bees and what to expect and what to do. So always wear whatever. If you wear a veil, jumpsuit, gloves, until the time comes that you're comfortable doing without, you do what you're comfortable doing. And that kind of, whether your bees are grumpy or not. Don't let anybody bully you into it. We don't have any bullies in here, do we? No. Okay, lighting a smoker. Now, I did say that this is one of the things I always hear people say. You know, they come to me and they say, you know what, the biggest headache I have is getting my smoker to stay lit. And I know Bruce has some kind of gizmo that he's come up with that I don't know if it's fired by propane or what, but you know, you may not want to go that far, or again, you might. I don't know. And I did say that I had a jar of sourwood honey. I also brought this is a day dance smoker, stainless steel, has a finger guard. If you get a smoker, make sure you get a finger guard on it. These guys will burn you. They get hot. So get one with a finger guard. This is stainless steel. It's a nice smoker. And I'll put it on the raffle table as well. So if you don't have a smoker and you feel unlucky, be sure to get some raffle tickets. Anyway, patience. Patience in all things. Patience in all things. But lighting a smoker is y'all are being so good. Nobody's phone goes off but mine. And I can't silence that part. Well, this is, I actually had the ringer silenced, but that was an alarm to remind me of something else, and I forgot about it. But I'll tell you how I light a smoker, but I will tell you the important thing is patience. And if you'll learn patience, I use pine straw. Is that what people use around here, is pine straw pretty much? Okay. I light the pine straw, like I've done there, and I take and I put the fire in first. The fire wants to burn the fuel above it, it'll do it better, and then I start to operate the bellows until I get a good, rich, white cloud of smoke. And then I'll add another handful, and I'll do it again until I get a rich handful of smoke, and I just gradually do that. It doesn't have to be packed, but it's got to be tight. And the reason is when it finally just does begin to smolder, the straw legs, if they're not in contact with one another, then they won't transfer that heat to the one above if it's not in contact. So there's got to be enough compression in there so that the fuel is all in contact with each other. So take your time. You're not in a hurry. I'm going to turn that thing off. I apologize. I actually really am embarrassed. So, take your time. There's a grate in the bottom that has some legs that gets it up off the bottom so they can get air in there. Make sure that's in there too when you go light your smoker. So just a quick lesson, but the important thing is that's one of the things that people have said to me more times than I can count. I can't keep my smoker lit. So just patience learning. And this is where this is where I talk about pollinators. One of your expectations might be you got these hives, you've got to, and it's what a lot of people tell me. They say, well, I got my bees, I put my hives out by my garden, I never see them on the flowers in my garden. Why not? And if you look here, this is my backyard, and this is one of my yards. And this is this fence that's around my garden. And right there can be anywhere from 15 to 30 hives. Probably in the spring of the year, you know, 1 million bees. And I can have okra go in and whatever else and walk down those rows. And if I see a single honeybee in there, I'm surprised. I see them flying across. But think about it this way. There's 30 to 50,000 bees in that honeybee hive. The amount of nectar that's going to come out of your garden is minuscule. Doesn't even begin to touch their needs. What they need is volume. And so they go out in the woods and they look for tulip poplar trees, these massive trees with huge root systems that, you know, fill these flowers by the gazillions all over the woods full of nectar, and that's what they're going to go for. Wild blackberries, wild blueberries, all kinds of different things we never see, but they're in volume, huge, massive volume in the woods. And so our gardens aren't as appealing to those honeybees. Now, when farmers when they bring in hives for pollination, what those do typically, like in almonds where we have bees today, first off, they're very appealing. Second off, they got miles and miles and miles of them, so they have the volume. And the third thing is they plop those bees down in the middle of a bunch of almonds, and as far as those bees can travel is almonds, so that's what they're going to forage on. But my garden, and probably your garden, may not hold that kind of appeal for them. But don't be surprised, don't be disappointed either. This is reality versus expectation. This little guy right here, you see on that dandelion, that little speck? That's a native pollinator. It's a solitary bee. She comes and collects pollen and a little bit of nectar. She burrows down in the ground, and if you ever see one, you know, burrowing, you'll be walking along in a field and you'll see some dirt spitting up out of the ground, and that's her excavating a tunnel, and she'll lay a handful of eggs in there, she'll provision them, and then she's done with that. And then all she has to do is feed herself. So it's not like a honeybee colony where everybody's going out all day, boo-boo-doo-doo by the thousands. Just one little person out there doing their job. And they're small, and they can get into any flower created on this planet if they're designed to be gotten into. So before there were ever honeybees in this continent, those guys were doing the job. Those are pollinators. And I know I've been accused of being a heretic, a beekeeping heretic, because, you know, I tell people our bees are only okay pollinators. Those bees are serious pollinators. They do the job, and we're fortunate beyond words, blessed beyond words, to have good populations of them in this part of the country. Because we have large areas. We don't have the kind of agriculture they have on the West Coast or in the Midwest, where they've clear-cut, you know, millions of contiguous acres, and there's no habitat left for them. And there's only one crop, and it only blooms, you know, once a season, and it's done. Oh, good, somebody else. I'm still embarrassed. So, you know, if you expect them on your garden, you may find them on your garden, in your garden, but, you know, you might think they're not doing their job, but it's okay, because somebody's going to be in there doing that job. And then I will tell you that if you want to plant something for your bees, you know, you can plant a bush or a shrub that blooms in the middle of the summer. Because remember I said those bees can starve in the summer? I like, you know, my favorite is a thing called the vitex. And vitex, it'll bloom in the summer and it'll become pretty big bushes. And while it won't feed those hives significantly, it won't alter the outcome of the hives that you keep. It'll still be covered, just absolutely covered with all kinds of bees. There'll be honeybees on it. There'll be these little guys. There'll be bumblebees. There'll be mason bees, and it'll just be covered, and it'll be it'll just put a smile on your face. You'll walk out there, and you'll walk by it without thinking, and you'll hear it before you see it. So if you want to plant something for your bees, plant something like that for in the summer. But otherwise, you can't make, unless you're going to plant, you know, 10 acres of buckwheat. Now, if you're going to plant 10 acres of buckwheat, that'll make a difference. But I don't know very many people that want to do that. Stay safe. Now I see that snake as a harmless black snake, but I didn't, the times I've seen copperheads, I didn't have the forethought to reach for my camera. So this was one that didn't scare me quite so badly. I didn't jump so badly, and I got my phone out and took a picture of it. Underneath those hives, you know, it's a place where snakes will come to rest. Black widows. If you reach up under a hive, just be very careful. I'd encourage you to wear your gloves if you're reaching up under a hive, and take a look and see if, you know, one of those brothers, you know, the other variety of those is underneath, because you don't want to encounter those. So be careful about that. And this poor goober right here, he is standing in a hospital. I was walking across the field carrying a super, and the grass was about this deep, and I stepped in a hole. And I'm gonna shorten the story. After 90 days of drugs and bed rest and physical therapy, I still couldn't walk. I thought my days were done. I thought, you know, forget beekeeping. I can't even go to the grocery store. I'd take 3 steps and the calf on my leg would knot up, and it was like a Charlie horse. I mean, if you know how that pain is, you just got to do something about it. And even the good drugs only took the edge off of it. And they'd only give me a little bit of those. So after 90 days, my doc said, you know, the only thing I can tell you is we'll just send you to a neurosurgeon and see what we can do. And I went in the hospital in a wheelchair, and I walked out the front door 5 hours later. And I'm still here, still walking. So, you know, that to me was as miraculous as anything could possibly be. Point is, be careful. Be careful. And I've seen rabid raccoons, and up in the mountains I see bear scat all around the electric fence around my hives. There are things out there. You just be careful, that's all. Don't let it intimidate you, but be careful. Okay, kind of a roundup. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep coming to these meetings. Come to everyone you can. Meet the people here. Try to find a good, trustworthy mentor. I'm talking about real people. Study varroa study their life cycle, look at what they do. Try to understand them so that when people talk about how to manage them, it'll make some sense. Why they talk about the timing, why you should treat, if you're going to treat, why you should do it and when you do it, or if you've chosen other methods, why you should do those. Try to understand it so that it makes sense. So it needs to make sense. And then, of course, harden your heart. Take your time on the internet. Be careful. Watch out for the scoundrels. Keep being here, reading, keep learning. Wear your gloves or whatever you need to do to open your hives regularly, especially when you're new. You'll never know what's going on and what to expect and what looks good and what looks bad if you don't get in there regularly. Be careful and always be patient. In not just in everything, but certainly in your beekeeping. Be patient. There's just not enough patience around anyway. There really isn't. And don't forget that really this is fun. I've talked about a lot of hard things and a lot of difficult things. I've tried to intersperse some fun things too. It is fun. It is a joy. And if these creatures grab you, they're not going to turn you loose. They'll bring you joy the rest of your life. And so keep that in mind when you feel frustrated. Don't just keep it in mind when you begin to feel frustrated, because there'll be frustrating times. And when you hit those low spots, just remember there's an up spot too. And that's pretty much what I came to say. I hope that made some sense.